Mental health, perhaps, is one of the most important health issues that we can talk about today. And there are a lot of different variables and factors that would determine the level of mental health, brain function, all that that we would have. One interesting question or topic that I want to talk about today is mental health or brain health in relation to a vegan diet. Is a vegan diet safe for brain health? Is it effective for brain health, maintaining or improving? Or is it outright dangerous? This is a video that I found where there's a podcast conversation with a doctor who I believe is a psychiatrist who talks about nutrition in relation to diet, specifically talking about a keto diet and why that is so beneficial for brain function, brain health, mental health, emotional health, and all of that. So I want to go over and review a clip of what she was talking about here and give my take on it in a review. Maybe there will be some points of agreement or disagreement, who knows? But I would imagine she is a doctor, so I would only assume that she's qualified to talk about the topic and she's done her research and is going to discuss this issue in a responsible fashion. So let's see what happens here.
Nutritionally pro-choice, and so I support people in improving the brain healthiness of their diet, regardless of their dietary preferences. There's actually a lot you can do to improve the health of just about any diet you're eating. It's not all about ketones, and it's not even all about plants and animals. Many different changes you can make that can benefit you. And so you can start wherever you want to start, right? And so one thing I do in the book is I don't just have these 3 different types of plans you can explore, but also a list of single changes you can make. If you're a dip your toe in the water kind of person or a one at a time kind of person, and you just want to make one change at a time, please do. If you don't want to completely overhaul your diet all at once, any change you make is going to be a step in the right direction if you know which changes are the right ones to try. So you can, and the other thing to mention about vegan diets, carnivore diets, ketosis, is that carnivore diets are almost always naturally ketogenic. Not always. There are ways to eat a carnivore diet where you will not be in ketosis. If you overeat protein, you will not be in ketosis, for example. But you can also, and a vegan diet is usually not ketogenic, but can be. So if you know how to construct the diet to get the insulin levels down, you need to basically reduce your carbohydrate intake on a vegan diet down to the level that you're going to start burning fat. It's harder to do with a vegan diet because the protein sources on vegan diets tend to be very starchy. But it can be done, especially.
Now, one thing that's very interesting to me is because she's talking about weight loss and bringing down insulin levels in order to get into fat burning. Now, it is true that weight loss can be beneficial to mental health or brain function. But weight loss is not really just a matter of getting your insulin levels down. And in fact, removing carbohydrates from your diet actually is not the only way to lower insulin levels. If you want to lower your insulin levels, what you could do is improve your insulin sensitivity. And the way to improve your insulin sensitivity is to eat more of a whole food diet that contains an abundance of the different micronutrients that improves insulin sensitivity. One of the most important ones would be something like magnesium, which is predominantly found in plant-based sources. And then, of course, another would be something like folate. which is a B vitamin that is essential to healthy brain function as well, which predominantly comes from whole food carbohydrate sources, especially like those starchy sources that she's just mentioned here.
If you can use tofu, for example, as an excellent example of a low carb, keto friendly, vegan source of protein. And it also happens to be a complete protein, so you're in luck there. So
Now, this phrase "complete protein" is very interesting, right? And the reason why it's interesting is because there's really no such thing as an incomplete protein. Now, you have certain foods that have, a certain type of amino acid profile where it's higher in certain amino acids than others. And so essentially, when you consume protein, you get proteins from a variety of different foods, but that protein ultimately is broken down into amino acids anyway, right? Into its simplest form. And then your body uses those amino acids to make individual things inside your body. So there's not really much of a use for complete proteins because those complete proteins end up getting broken down into individual amino acids anyway. And then over time, those amino acids will then get used in a variety of different ways inside the human body, right? And so this is why you would want a diet that has a bit of variety to it, so that you're getting a whole variety of different minerals, amino acids, vitamins, antioxidants, etc.
there you can do it. It can be done, and you will need careful supplementation, of course. But you can get the benefits of a ketogenic diet no matter what your dietary preferences are. Because
I'm very interested to know. She said it will take careful supplementation. Careful supplementation to do what? And then what type of supplementation is she talking about? And then when she says careful supplementation, as opposed to what? Careless supplementation? So yeah, I don't really know what she means by that. But hopefully she'll explain going through the clip here.
ketosis is not a food list; it's a metabolic state of low insulin levels. And as long as you're eating in a way that your insulin levels are not about plants and animals, insulin levels are about your macronutrient ratios, carbohydrate, fat, and protein. If they're in the right range, it doesn't matter what foods you're eating, you can get there. So I want everybody to know that they can take advantage of that metabolic state. And there are people who have done it and have written books about it. And there are cookbooks, there are vegan cookbooks available. Please don't let that stand in your way of exploring this very important and very powerful metabolic strategy.
Okay, but when we look at the vegan diet from a metabolic perspective, we can see how we could make that work for ketosis.
Mm-hmm.
But we did talk about ALA before and DHA and EPA. There is a list of different nutrients, and you did touch on the fact they would need to supplement. But I don't want to give people false hope in that diet that if they go ketogenic, that's going to be enough. And I know you haven't, but I want to further expand on that because there are certain nutrients that somebody isn't going to be getting if they're limiting themselves in that way.
Yeah, so in regards to EPA and DHA, EPA is primarily found in plant-based foods, essential fatty acids, where your body will have its own balancing of EPA and DHA. So you'll have, and I guess the supplementation that he's referring to in that regard is the supplementation of DHA, right? DHA is synthesized in your liver. Okay, so when you eat essential fatty acids, your body does its own conversion process, right? And in that conversion process is where your body will synthesize its own DHA. Now, most of your DHA is actually, you actually get that in the early portion of your life, right? Like in the early stages of fetal development and as a baby doing things like breastfeeding, right? And as adults, we don't really need any significant amount of DHA as adults because our brain is already fully formed, right? So, getting DHA from your diet is not really a thing that is essential. But yeah, I just figured I'd touch on that.
That's true. I mean, of course, the diet. So the diet needs to do three. A brain healthy diet needs to do three things. So one of my goals in the book was to define, for the first time, I think, really, what a brain healthy diet needs to be. So my definition of a brain healthy diet is it has to nourish the brain, protect the brain, energize the brain. Right? It has to nourish the brain by providing all essential nutrients. Now that is a no-brainer, so to speak. Of course, the brain needs all essential nutrients. So a vegan diet, if it's constructed only of whole foods and does not contain supplements or fortified processed foods, is a nutritionally inadequate diet for a human being. And that's very
That's a very strong claim, right? And that's been a claim that's been debunked as well. So if she's referring to DHA, then she probably doesn't understand that DHA is not necessarily essential to the human diet because it's a resource that your body makes on its own, right? Kind of like vitamin D. So, for example, you go outside, you get sun exposure, and your body synthesizes its own vitamin D when you get hit with sun exposure. It's not really a thing that is required for you to get through your diet, right? So that's not essential to the diet either, right? And then I think it's another one that people often mention, which is B12. And B12 is not actually, it's not really made by food. And B12 is actually made by bacteria. It's a postbiotic, right? It's made by bacteria. Now, your gut synthesizes its own B12, number one, and then B12 would also be found in fresh water sources. And those fresh water sources could come into contact with things like produce, as well as the soil that the produce is grown. And then essentially that B12 or that bacteria makes its way into the food and releases those postbiotics, etc. Right? So you actually do get B12 from your food, even though you're eating produce, and your gut also makes it as well. B12 is not made inside animal flesh or animal products, right? So you can be B12 deficient even if you eat meat. And in fact, most people who are B12 deficient eat meat. So if the solution to reversing B12 deficiency was just to eat meat, then you wouldn't have the overwhelming majority of people who were being B12 deficient being meat eaters. All right, so just an important information to note there.
well known. And the problem goes beyond B12 to other nutrients as well, will be in short supply. So it's very, very important, no matter what dietary pattern you're eating, to make sure you're getting all your nutrients. And vegans will have the most difficulty meeting their nutrient needs, but most people are not meeting all their nutrient needs, even when they're eating a mixed diet, partly because we've been encouraged to eat less and less animal food, which is where most of the nutrients are.
Most of the nutrients are not in animal foods. And in actuality, if you're talking about things like vitamins and minerals, specifically minerals originate in the soil, and our first nutritional contact with these minerals are from plants, not animals. Getting your minerals from animals is actually a secondhand source, whereas your fruits and vegetables and plant-based food sources are the primary source for your minerals, right? So I mean, maybe she is not that well informed in nutrition to know that. Now, what's interesting too is saying that, oh, the reason why, people are so nutrient deficient even today is because, well, they don't eat enough meat. Well, that's kind of odd because she is, I believe, a U.S. citizen living in the U.S. Maybe you can fact check me on that as far as I know. But here in the U.S. where I am, this is one of the largest meat eating populations in the world, right? Animal agriculture makes up like 80% of our food system. I mean, you can look at any kind of commercial that has anything to do with food in this country, and it's all animal products: beef, red meat, chicken, all kinds of stuff, right? So Americans actually eat a ton of meat and eat a ton of animal products, and there's dairy in everything. So the idea that people are nutrient deficient because they don't eat enough meat, while simultaneously also being obese from overeating, it's kind of odd to just say, oh, the nutrient deficiencies just come from not eating enough meat. Well, what happens when a person is magnesium deficient? Meat, not really a good source of magnesium, and you can eat yourself into a magnesium deficiency with meat consumption, specifically excess meat consumption, because things like saturated fat actually inhibit magnesium absorption in the intestines, of course, to varying degrees, depending on how much saturated fat is in that meal at a time. Right, so people get a lot of their saturated fat from dairy, cooking oils, and things like that, as well as the meat. And meat in general is not really a good magnesium source. And magnesium is actually a currency used in the metabolic process to break down those fats and proteins. So you can actually drive yourself into a magnesium deficiency as a result of eating these foods. And being that we're not really eating raw meat because human beings don't really have the jaw strength or the teeth or the physiology to do it, we cook meat, right? Well, I don't cook meat because I don't eat meat. But for the people they do, you're baking meat, you're grilling meat, but you're putting it under high temperatures. And you're using butter and things like that. You're oxidizing it, and that's also inflammatory, which can also lead you into a deficiency in magnesium. And on record, at least 40% of the population is magnesium deficient, which is a primary driver of insulin resistance, depression, anxiety, high blood pressure, fatty liver disease, hyperthyroidism, etc. Right? But if you go into something like MyFitnessPal or Chronometer, I think it's Chronometer, that would actually show you how much magnesium is in your foods. You'll see that the predominant sources for magnesium are going to be plant-based foods, mainly nuts and seeds, grains and legumes, and some fruits like, let's say, cantaloupe and bananas. All right.
Also because we've been advised to get most of our nutrients from to base our diets on starchy staples, namely grains and legumes. So grains like corn, rice, wheat, and oats, and legumes like beans, peas, and lentils, right? And
No one's telling you to get majority of your nutrients from corn. So that's not true.
then versions, various processed versions of those things like breads and pastas and so forth, right? That's the foundation of the Mediterranean diet. The Mediterranean diet is 45 to 65% carbohydrate. That's also what the standard that the USDA recommends. 45 to 65% of calories should come from carbohydrates. So, so if you're eating that way, it's not just that you might not be getting enough nutrients from animal foods. It's that the foundation of your diet is nutritionally very poor. These starchy staples are really nutrient poor, very few nutrients in them, but they're also high in anti-nutrients.
I'm surprised she's saying that because there is no epidemiological or statistical data whatsoever to support the statement she just made. And in fact, a whole food high carb plant based diet and the Mediterranean diet are like the top two best diets associated with lower all cause mortality in general. So I'm surprised she's actually saying something like that publicly because there's no evidence for it at all whatsoever. And in fact, out of all of the available data that we have currently, it really goes to show, it clearly demonstrates that the more plant-based foods, fruits and vegetables and things like that you add to your diet, that would reduce your risk of things like diabetes, heart disease, obesity, etc. So that's a very bold claim for her to make, and there's no evidence for that. So we'll see if she elaborates and substantiates that claim.
So they are actively interfering with your ability to access a certain number of essential nutrients, particularly like one great example is minerals, calcium, magnesium, and iron and zinc. These foods actively work against your ability to absorb those nutrients. So many people who eat an omnivorous diet are iron deficient.
Most people who are iron deficient eat animal products. most of the population with the mineral deficiencies eat meat. Like again, there's no statistical data to support this claim at all. I work personally as a nutritionist. I specifically work in reversing chronic illness. Right, I have plenty of people who can attest to this. People come to me with all kinds of stuff: diabetes, high blood pressure, hypothyroidism, hyperthyroidism, cancer, obesity, atherosclerosis, anxiety, depression, etc. So, I mean, even in my own personal experience, this is just a thing that is not clearly demonstrated at all. So, yeah, this is a very bold claim.
Many people who eat a non-inverse diet don't have, their zinc levels are inadequate.
Zinc is typically found in high protein foods. So you mean to tell me that people who eat an omnivorous diet and eat meat and have a high protein diet, because if you eat meat, you'll have a higher protein diet, because meat essentially is animal muscle. The highest sources of zinc are foods that contain high levels of protein. And in fact, the sources that are even plant-based, the highest zinc sources, the highest plant-based zinc sources are your nuts and seeds and legumes, because of the protein content, right? High protein foods have more zinc on average than any other foods. So she's now saying that, hey, even people who eat meat, they got real low zinc, even though they eat more protein than the people who are vegan. She's kind of undermining her own claim at this point. She may not even know where zinc even comes from. She may not even know what zinc is or what it does. I don't know. But based on what she's saying, it sounds like a person who doesn't understand nutrition all too well, because there's zero evidence for these claims at all. So, all right, well, let's keep going.
They may need to supplement magnesium to feel well. There are lots of...
So they need to supplement magnesium to feel well. Or they could just eat more plants to get magnesium. Or they can do a both and, right? Like, I'm a fan of supplementation as well as a whole food diet. But I mean, if she's going to say that, oh yeah, you know, those vegans and they're all deficient. Well, you also have people who eat meat who are also deficient. Now, if she's going to be a person where her specialty is talking about optimizing nutrition for brain health, well, she's going to have some pretty deep knowledge of the gut microbiome, often known as your gut brain or your second brain, because your gut microbiome or your gut health directly contributes to and even determines your brain health. Right? So, for example, serotonin, referred to as your feel-good hormone, the hormone that allows you to feel pleasure and happiness. Serotonin is mostly and overwhelmingly synthesized in your gut from the foods you eat. Magnesium, tryptophan, glucose, for example, which is the reason why if you're experiencing depression, you get sugar cravings, because your body craves the glucose in order to feed your body and give it the necessary energy to be able to synthesize this serotonin. And when your gut is producing adequate levels of serotonin, that also translates into more synthesis of serotonin in the brain and conversion of melatonin in the brain, which allows you to get into a deeper sleep. By the way, what she hasn't mentioned, where she talked about one of her 3 points that your diet should do is fuel the brain. Well, guess what the primary source of energy is for the brain? Glucose, commonly known as sugar. And in a keto diet, guess what you're not getting? Sugar. And if you're going to advocate against carb-rich foods and those poor quality starchy foods, as she says, whatever those foods are, guess what you're also not getting? Glucose. Okay. And so what happens is you put yourself into a state of ketosis. And if you already have a compromised metabolic system, you can end up having issues, for example, excessively high cortisol levels. And if your cortisol levels are excessively high, this can be very deeply problematic for people with anxiety. And then, of course, typically what happens is your body will then use estrogen and raise estrogen levels in order to offset the cortisol, to bring the cortisol down. And then estrogen climbs as a result. And that estrogen is a buffer against distress to help protect your heart and reduce muscle and bone loss, right? Estrogen is an anti-stress hormone. So eventually what happens is your adrenal glands get kind of worn out after a while, especially as your sleep quality falls off a cliff, right? And so this is where you can be subject to constantly needing uppers like caffeine in order to have healthy energy. And people who advocate for a keto diet, caffeine is one of those staples to basically act as a hedge for the lack of glucose, right? And then the fasting and all this type of stuff too. So it's very good for weight loss, sure, because you're losing a lot of water weight. So you can be reducing interstitial fluid, which could potentially drop your blood pressure and things like that. So it works short term, but the longer you do it, you start having negative side effects as a result. So when you're on a keto diet, a hedge against that diet is to implement more foods like vegetables, leafy green vegetables, right? Bell peppers, onions, herbs, spinach, kale, arugula, etc., cucumbers, and these types of things. Anything that's low on the glycemic index that has a very minimal blood sugar impact or whatever the case is, because you still need those minerals, right? Well, I'm doing minerals in quotation bunny ears. It's not, minerals come from the plants, right? And so you need that as well as a fasting protocol to act as a hedge against all of the animal products and the saturated fat and whatnot that would also contribute to things like diabetes and high blood pressure, etc. As well as the compromising of your gut, right? Also, in regards to gut health and the gut microbiome, which essentially is your gut is just filled with bacteria, right? Like trillions of like bacteria. I think like the total weight of the bacteria, all of the bacteria in your average adult gut is like 10 pounds or something like that. At least if it, if I remember correctly. Essentially, it's an organ. It's a whole colony of bacteria, and they need prebiotics, right? That bacteria is referred to as probiotics, right? Beneficial gut bacteria. And the fiber from the plant foods are called prebiotics, which feed your probiotics. And then your probiotics will do all kinds of important enzymatic and hormone processes and whatnot that benefit your health. And probiotics do this very interesting thing where they release this thing called postbiotics. So vitamin K2, folate, and B12, for example, right? These are postbiotics. And then there's things like short chain fatty acids, right? So like, let's say, for example, you eat apples, the fiber in the apple, referred to as apple pectin, ferments in your lower gut. And in that fermentation process, your gut bacteria release this thing called short chain fatty acids, which helps with fat metabolism, for example, right? So absolutely fascinating. So I haven't read her book or whatever the case is, but if she's going to be talking about optimizing brain health and whatnot, well, she got to go pretty in depth about the relevance of improving your gut health in that regard. I don't know if she gets into that in this clip, but that's an important thing to talk about.
Lots of nutrient deficiencies that you can see even in the standard sort of mixed diet. So the reason why I took so much time in the book to explain not just ketogenic diets and insulin resistance and metabolic psychiatry, I took a lot of time in the book to explain nutrition. Because ketones, as you just said so wisely, ketones aren't enough. The brain needs more than just ketones. The brain can't function on ketones alone. The brain needs building blocks. The brain needs all of those vitamins and minerals and the right kind of fuel in order to energize itself, maintain itself, and operate at its best. And where do all of those molecules come from? They come from your food. So ketones alone, brain can't live on ketones alone. It needs nutrients as well, and you need to know which foods contain those nutrients, which foods allow you to access those nutrients, and which foods you can absorb those nutrients from and utilize properly. And I think that's a big part of the book is kind of relearning what a healthy diet actually looks like.
If you enjoyed that,
Okay, so there you have it. So basically, I just want to sit here. Occasionally, I do these video reviews, going over, some stuff that doctors have to say coming out of the medical community. So there's a lot to nutrition, right? So just focusing on the keto thing, I mean, there are benefits to ketosis. There's benefits to it. There's benefits to a lot of things. Am I an advocate of ketosis? No, because I generally err against anything that is going to contribute to dehydration. If you are dealing with things like depression, anxiety, brain fog, and things like that, chances are you're insulin resistant, you have a magnesium and vitamin D deficiency, right? And chances are your blood pressure is a little bit elevated, you got poor sleep quality, that kind of thing. These could be signs there, right? Some people can be more severe than others, right? Some people can have kidney issues, and you can see kidney issues as a result of high blood pressure, neuropathy, and edema, which would feel like swelling in the hands, wrist, ankles, and feet, lower legs, pins and needles in the feet, which is a sign of nerve damage. And so to improve on issues like this, you would need more B vitamins, right? More thiamine and folate in your diet, more pyridoxine in your diet, for example, just several B vitamins in your diet, right? You would need more sun exposure or supplement with vitamin D, for example. You can supplement with vitamin D3, but then also you should make sure that you get enough dietary magnesium or supplement with magnesium. I'm a big fan of supplementing with magnesium. It's a beautiful water-soluble macro mineral that should be abundant in your diet, right? Especially if you're supplementing with vitamin D, because you can supplement with plenty of vitamin D3 or whatever kind of vitamin D, and you can store it in your body, but in order for your body to use it, it requires magnesium. So if your diet is short on the magnesium, then essentially you're supplementing with the vitamin D and not really getting the benefit of it. You need that magnesium in order for that vitamin D to be converted into vitamin D25 hydroxy in your liver. And that's the usable form that your body would then use. So there's a conversion process and a lot of different nutrients that takes place in your liver, right? So you can't have any kind of fatty liver disease or insulin resistance, which also is directly linked to vitamin D and magnesium deficiency. And dehydration. So for mental health, some mental health foods I'm a big fan of are things like avocado, watermelon, cantaloupe, mangoes, grapes, all sorts of berries, kiwis, these kinds of foods, right? Things like arugula, kale, watercress, right? These are just a few, right? And these are all raw foods. Things like hemp seeds, flax seeds, chia seeds, pumpkin seed kernels, right? Cashews, walnuts, pistachios, almonds. Okay. Sweet potato, lentils. My favorite personally is red lentils. And then putting in things like basil, thyme, oregano into your foods, right? Adding in diced onion, bell pepper, and cucumber, all these types of things into your food. Having that variety, that plant-based variety, water-rich foods. And if you're having blood pressure issues, high blood pressure can cause a lot of stress in the brain, because high blood pressure is an indication of vascular constriction. Vascular constriction is an indication of oxidative stress. Okay, so when there's stress that's applied on your body and you're getting a degradation of the cells in your body, this is usually a result of a lack of oxygenation, acid accumulation, and that leads to vascular constriction. So eating something like watermelon or juicing beets and cucumber with carrots and Granny Smith apples, things like that, this raises the nitric oxide levels in your body, and nitric oxide causes vasodilation, the expansion and widening of your vascular system, right? And so those red foods like I mentioned, or the green foods like I mentioned, like cucumber, beets, or watermelon, contain an amino acid called citrulline, which is a precursor to another amino acid called arginine, and your body uses arginine to create nitric oxide. That increased oxygenation and hydration from those foods leads immediately to the reduction in your blood pressure, and you get more oxygenation, and then you alkalize your body. And that contributes to you getting better brain health, better sleep quality, better mental focus, better mood, all types of stuff. And so when you eat like that on a consistent basis, this water rich, glucose abundant, folate abundant diet with all that fiber and whatnot that feeds your gut microbiome to rebuild and expand on your gut microbiome, thus improving your immune system and protecting your brain, right? Because this stuff is neuroprotective. To have a B vitamin rich, glucose rich, vitamin C rich, water rich diet, this is neuroprotective. So if we're talking about brain health, well, we need our diet not just to fuel our brains and all of this type of stuff, but to improve our sleep quality as well. Because deprivation in sleep quality really is what does the most damage to our brain health. So I can go on and have this be an excessively long video, but I think I'll leave it there. If you need help with fixing your metabolism, lowering your blood pressure, improving kidney function, liver function, improving sleep quality, reversing depression, anxiety, reversing gut health issues, leaky gut, IBS, Crohn's, colitis, things like this, hit the link in the description of this video and book a call with me. You get a full hour to discuss your issues and the approach that you can take to fix them. In the link in the description, you can also sign up for my 12-week mentorship in addition to that, or join my free newsletter. Catch you in the next one.